Someone calls you. The voice on the other end hesitates before speaking. When the sentence arrives, it is not long, but you no longer hear what comes after. The line continues. You respond with sounds that resemble words. You hang up. You stand exactly where you were, office, kitchen, sidewalk. And for a few seconds, the entire world seems to operate in slow motion without sound. Traffic exists. People walk by. Work is still open on the screen. But something shifted position inside you, and you cannot name what it is. It is not sadness yet. It comes before sadness. It is a kind of unbearable clarity that lasts exactly until the moment you decide to do something, anything. Reply to a message, drink some water, turn on the radio. And when you do that, when you resume movement, the clarity disappears, as if it had never existed. That is what death does, not when it arrives, when it passes close. You are here because at some point, recent or distant, real or merely imagined, something touched on this question. And the question did not leave. It stayed, not at the center of your attention, but at the perimeter, waiting. This video will not give you comfort. Nietzsche did not give comfort. He gave diagnosis. And the diagnosis, as you will see, is more disturbing than the question that brought you here. There is an experience that practically every adult has had, but that is rarely named with precision. It is not the fear of dying. That fear is familiar. It appears in the form of physical symptoms, health checks, anxiety on airplanes. It is manageable. It has a protocol. What I am describing is different. It is the moment in which death, the idea of it, the proximity of it, the mathematical certainty of it, produces a specific sensation in relation to one's own life. The sensation that everything you built, accumulated, pursued, and defended seems for an instant incredibly small. Not empty in the dramatic sense, small in the clinical sense. Like when you see a photograph of yourself from 10 years ago and realize you were intensely worried about things you can no longer even remember. Death produces that same effect, but with your entire current life, not with the past, with now. And the default reaction, the reaction the system trained into you, is to abandon that thought as quickly as possible. Move on to the next appointment, turn something on, talk to someone, convert the silence into activity. The problem is that this is not a coincidence, and Nietzsche knew exactly why. Think about the architecture of a common day. You wake up to an alarm. The alarm is connected to a calendar. The calendar is connected to appointments. The appointments are connected to goals. The goals are connected to a narrative about who you are becoming. And that narrative is connected to a version of yourself in the future, more accomplished, more stable, closer to the place you have not yet reached. This structure operates with extraordinary efficiency. It does not need to force anything on you. It simply ensures that your attention never runs out of a destination. There is always the next item. There is always the next deadline. There is always the next horizon to aim at. And it works. It works so well that certain questions simply cannot emerge. Not because you have forbidden them, but because there is no space between one movement and the next for them to settle in. The question, where does all of this lead, requires silence to be formulated. And the system, the architecture of the common day, is designed so that silence never lasts long enough. This is not paranoia. It is observation. Look at what happens when silence forces its way in. A hospital bed. An unexpected diagnosis. A funeral of someone who should have had more time. A moment alone, without stimulation, without a screen, without a task, in which the mind goes where it normally does not go. What do these moments have in common? They interrupt the sequence. And when the sequence is interrupted, something that was hidden behind it becomes visible. Not death, that which was hidden behind the life you were living. The question this video poses is not, what happens after we die? That question is ancient and has various answers, none of them verifiable. The question Nietzsche asked was more brutal and more immediate. What happens to the systems of meaning that sustain a life when they are confronted with the question they cannot answer? Because death is not merely a biological limit, it is a test of philosophical coherence. And most of the systems people use to make sense of their lives, systems built around productivity, recognition, social identity, personal progress, fail that test completely. Not because they are insufficient, but because they were never designed to answer that question. They were designed to avoid it. That is what you will see now. Friedrich Nietzsche was born in 1844 and died in 1900. Between those 2 points, he produced a diagnosis of Western culture that remains without a satisfactory answer to this day. Nietzsche was not a pessimist. That is the most common misconception about him. He was a diagnostician, someone who saw systems with enough clarity to describe them without the mediation of comfort. The central concept that matters here is not the eternal return or the Übermensch. Those are the Nietzsche that memes know. The concept that matters is what he called the crisis of values. The observation that the modern West had built systems of meaning that depended on foundations that were being progressively eroded. The most well-known formulation is, God is dead. But Nietzsche was not doing theology. He was doing cultural diagnosis. What he meant was, the set of values that organized human experience, the moral hierarchy, the transcendent purpose, the narrative of spiritual progress, had lost its foundation, and the problem was not the absence of those values. It was that most people continued acting as if they still existed, without realizing that the foundation had been removed. He called this reactive nihilism, not the courageous declaration that nothing matters, but the automatic continuation of behaviors whose foundation had disappeared. And here is the connection that is rarely made. Death is the moment when reactive nihilism becomes impossible to sustain, because death does not negotiate with the functional substitutes you put in place of the original foundations. There is an experiment you can run right now while watching this. Think about what you would say if someone asked you, why does what you do matter? Not the quick answer. The real answer. The answer you would give if you had to truly defend it. Most people would arrive at one of a few categories. It matters because it is useful. It matters because it fulfills me. It matters because it contributes to something larger. It matters because it defines me. Now apply death as a filter. Useful. Useful for what? On which timescale? For whom exactly? Fulfilling. Fulfilled in relation to which version of yourself? Defined by which value system? Contributes to something larger. What is the permanence of that something larger? Defines you. Who is the you being defined? And for how long does that definition last? It is not nihilism to ask these questions. It is simply checking whether the answers can withstand an honest interlocutor. Nietzsche observed that most modern systems of meaning cannot withstand that, not because life has no value, but because the systems built to generate that value are functional. They work while you are inside them, while the movement continues, while the questions do not arrive. Death is the moment when you step outside the system and see it from the outside for the first time. And what you see when you are outside is the structure, not the life you were living. The scaffolding, the invisible framework that kept that life organized. You believe you pursue your goals because you chose them. Examine that carefully. Do you want the promotion because the promotion matters to you? Or because the logic of your environment defines promotion as a marker of value? Do you want the house, the marriage, the child, the body, the project, the status? Because these things carry intrinsic weight in your experience? Or because they are the items the system offers as proof that you are living correctly? Nietzsche distinguished between created values and inherited values. Inherited values do not appear as impositions. They appear as personal preferences. The cage has no visible bars. It simply has an arrangement of furniture that makes you never want to move beyond them. There is a difference between systems designed to answer hard questions and systems designed to keep you from stopping long enough to formulate them. Most modern systems of meaning belong to the second category. Productivity is not a philosophy of life. It is an operational protocol. Social recognition is not an existential foundation. It is circuit feedback. Identity constructed through achievements is not a self. It is a portfolio. None of these systems was built to withstand the question, why, after all? They were built so that you are always too busy to formulate it seriously. Death forces the formulation, and the system, without exception, has no answer. The sensation of insignificance that death produces is not created by death. It is revealed by it. There is a difference between those two verbs that changes everything. If death created the sensation, it would be a distortion, a temporary state to be overcome. But if it reveals, if the insignificance was already there, covered by movement and stimulation and a narrative of progress, then what you feel when death passes close is not a crisis. It is clarity. Clarity about how much of the meaning you experienced was generated by the functioning of the system and not by any real foundation. Nietzsche called this a second-order illusion, not the simple lie, but the sophisticated construction that requires you never to stop in order to be maintained. There is a pattern that appears with consistency in the accounts of people who have had a real proximity to death, their own or someone close to them. The pattern is not what common sense suggests. Common sense suggests that proximity to death produces gratitude, appreciation for the small things, clarity about what truly matters, and those things happen, but they are the surface layer. The deeper layer, the one that is rarely articulated with precision, is a sensation of strangeness in relation to one's own systems of meaning, as if you were looking at the mechanisms that sustain your life from a slightly exterior position, and realizing, perhaps for the first time, that they are mechanisms, not truths, mechanisms. The calendar still exists, the goals still exist, the relationships still exist, but for a period which can last hours or months, depending on the intensity of the experience, they do not seem to carry the same automatic weight they carried before. You continue following the protocols, but you feel the mechanics of them in a way you did not feel before. This is what Nietzsche described as the collapse of valuative innocence, the moment in which values cease to be transparent, cease to be simply the way things are, and become visible as constructions. And the discomfort does not come from the collapse. It comes from the realization that you will have to keep operating within the systems, even knowing that they are systems, because there is no outside, or if there is, you do not know where it is. There is a second observation Nietzsche made that is even more disturbing. It is not only that modern systems of meaning do not answer death, it is that they were structured in such a way as to render that question illegitimate. Death in the culture of performance is a management problem. There is a grief protocol, leave, therapy, stages to be completed. The implicit objective is the return to functioning. Death is treated as an interruption, not as a fundamental philosophical datum. And this means that the sensation of insignificance it produces is also treated as a symptom to be treated, not as information to be examined. You are not encouraged to sit with that sensation long enough to understand it. You are encouraged to overcome it, to be resilient, to return. But Nietzsche would ask, return to what exactly? Here is the mechanism. You do not feel that life is insignificant because death revealed a metaphysical truth. You feel that life is insignificant because the systems that generated meaning for your life were never designed to withstand that question. And when the question arrives, they simply stop functioning. It is the difference between a foundation and a stage set. A foundation holds under pressure. A stage set collapses when you push hard enough. Productivity is a stage set. Recognition is a stage set. Identity constructed through achievements is a stage set. They work while you are inside the play. When the play stops, when death walks on stage, invited or not, the stage set has no substance. And what Nietzsche was pointing to is not that you should abandon these systems. He was pointing to the fact that you need to see them for what they are before you can decide anything in relation to them. Most people never see them. They live inside the stage set, confusing it with reality. And when the stage set collapses, temporarily during a crisis, the sensation they describe as emptiness is actually the moment in which they are seeing for the first time the difference between the system and what was behind it. The void is not the absence of meaning. It is the absence of the stage set. And there lies the question Nietzsche left unanswered. What do you build when you stop confusing the two? You have made it this far. Let this land. Death does not render life insignificant. That would be too simple. A nihilistic argument that has its own form of comfort, because at least it is an answer. What death does is more surgical. It temporarily removes the functioning of the systems that generated the sensation of meaning. And when those systems stop functioning, what you experience is not the truth about life. It is the structure behind the systems. The sensation of emptiness is not information about the value of life. It is information about the nature of the systems you use to assign value to it. And those systems, the calendar, the goals, the identity constructed through achievements, the narrative of progress, were inherited, not chosen. They were absorbed from the environment as if they were personal preferences, when they are, in Nietzsche's formulation, second-hand values. Functional, efficient, but grounded in nothing that can withstand an honest examination. This does not mean you should abandon them. It means you are operating within them without knowing that they were systems, confusing the system with reality, the scaffolding with the building, the stage set with the foundation. Death interrupted that confusion. For an instant, you saw the difference. Now look at what this implies. Every time you felt that death made everything insignificant, what was actually happening was that the systems generating meaning were revealing their contingent nature, not false, contingent, dependent on specific conditions in order to function. And culture responded to this in a very particular way, by making death illegible as a philosophical datum. It exists in the protocol, grief, overcoming, return. But it does not exist as a legitimate question about the nature of the systems that organize life. You are not trained to sit with the discomfort that death produces. You are trained to overcome it, to be resilient, to process it, to move forward. But moving forward, in the sense the system uses, means returning to the functioning of the very same systems that death just exposed as contingent. Nietzsche had no problem with that. He had a problem with the unconsciousness of it, with the confusion between returning to functioning and having answered the question. Because the question was not answered, it was silenced. And there is a difference between those two things that completely determines the kind of life you will live from here on. A life in which you operate within systems and know that they are systems, and a life in which you operate within systems believing they are reality. Nietzsche called the second case herd existence, not as an insult, as a clinical description. The herd does not choose its direction. It follows the logic of collective movement, which was already underway when it arrived, and will be underway when it is gone. Death is the only moment in which the herd stops long enough for an individual to look around and realize they had been in motion. What Nietzsche understood about death was not that it rendered life absurd. It was that it made visible how much of life had been lived on autopilot, inside inherited systems, toward destinations defined by logics that had never been examined, generating a sensation of purpose that depended on never stopping to verify its foundation. Death stops the movement, and when the movement stops, what was hidden behind it becomes visible, not the meaning of life, the machinery you use to avoid having to ask about the meaning of life. And that machinery, now that you have seen it, will not disappear. You will continue using the calendar. You will continue pursuing goals. You will continue operating within the systems the environment offers, because there is no immediate alternative. And because some of these systems carry genuine value, that is not undone simply by the fact that they are systems. But there is a difference between using a system, knowing it is a system, and living inside it, confusing it with reality. Nietzsche did not offer the way out. He offered the diagnosis. And the diagnosis is this: the sensation of insignificance that death produces is not a perceptual error to be corrected. It is a structural datum about the nature of the systems you use to avoid having to feel that sensation. What you do with that datum, if there is anything to do, is the question this video will not answer, because Nietzsche did not answer it either. And perhaps the point is precisely this: some questions do not exist to be answered. They exist to ensure that you do not spend your entire life pretending you never formulated them. You may not hear this question for weeks, for months. The system will absorb your attention back. The calendar will reconstitute itself. The movement will begin again, but it will return. It always returns, not as a crisis, as a datum. And when it returns, you will have a choice you did not have before. Silence it back into protocol, or sit with it long enough to see what it is showing you. It is not comfort. It was never about comfort. If what you saw here deserves to continue, If structural lucidity is the kind of thinking you want close, the Antidote Philosophy channel exists for that, not to give you answers, to ensure the right questions remain active. Subscribe and keep reading the code.